my husband caught our ghost on camera. I don't know why I never told this before. Let me tell you all about our haunted townhouse. In Feb 2011, shortly after my husband and I got married, we moved into a 3-bedroom townhouse. It wasn't right away that we realized we weren't its only inhabitants. Our first experience, we didn't even realize until looking back months later. It was late one night, just before midnight. My 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son had their own rooms upstairs. My husband and my room was right at the bottom of the steps. We were heading to bed when we hear my daughter yell, "Get out of my room," and little feet pitter-patter down the hall to my son's room. So we both went upstairs, me to get after the boy for being out of bed, him to check on the girl. Both kids were sound asleep and my son's bedroom door was closed, which we would have heard close if it had even been open in the first place. We wrote off the experience. My daughter has always yelled in her sleep, and the footsteps could have been from a neighbor. But a few nights later, we started hearing things in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Things rattling around, falling off the counters, drawers opening and closing. At first, we thought it was the kids, but when we'd go out there, no one was there. We'd check their beds, and they were sound asleep. The dining table chairs would move in the night, and anything we'd ever leave on the table would be on the floor when we woke up. We'd hear footsteps upstairs, and sometimes we thought we heard whispering. My husband would try to stay up at night in the living room to watch, but on those nights nothing ever happened. Eventually he decided to set up a camera. We didn't have any fancy equipment, so he used his HTC phone, cleared all the memory, and left it plugged in and on record from about midnight until whenever it cut off the video. For weeks after this, I made my kids sleep in my room with me. We stayed in the townhouse for lack of other options. We heard these things almost nightly, but nothing bad ever happened. My husband is a skeptic. For the most part, he still is. He swears there has to be a logical explanation for what we saw in this video, but I've had these experiences before we were married. For a while, I thought it was something that had attached itself to my daughter. She's told me since she was 18 months old that there was a man in our house, old house, not the townhouse, named Charming. Here's a little more into that story. The house we were moving into was small and crudely put together. It seemed as though the original owner had built it himself. The floors, cabinets, and walls were not completely straight. The original hardwood floor was cracked and filled with crumbs and dust. Needless to say, it was creepy right off the bat. Living alone was new to me. I had always lived with my family, friends, or my children's father. But recently I had left him, and me and our 2 small children moved into our own home. The first night I spent there, I tucked my daughter into bed and had an uneasy feeling about the closet in her room, but I wrote it off as first night jitters and climbed into bed myself. The unsettling feeling of being watched continued with the closet in her room, and also the closet in my own room, the basement, and the kitchen right in front of the basement door. Whenever I was in the kitchen, it felt as though someone was standing in that doorway watching me. When I opened either closet, I also felt piercing eyes on me. Going down the basement to do laundry was the worst. I always felt like someone was in the back of the basement near the crawl space watching me, and then it would follow me so close as if it were breathing on my neck, up the stairs until I shut the door. Still, I justified it, telling myself I was just afraid of being alone for the first time. 2 weeks into living there, my 18-month-old daughter told me she was afraid of the man in the kitchen. She pointed to him and said his name was Charming and that he lived in the basement. Weeks later, on the drive home from my parents' house, she asked me if we were going back to his house. I told her we were going back to our house. She said, "No, that's his house." At this point, nothing strange had happened. No swinging cupboards or doors left open. just eerie, uncomfortable feelings. But that night, when I tucked her into bed and turned on her radio, like I always do, the volume was so loud it startled me, and instead of music it was deep, rough male voice. Demonic, almost. I listened for a moment, but I couldn't understand what it was saying, as if it was in another language. I quickly tuned the radio to another station and spent the rest of the night trying to justify the voice. Maybe it was a different electronic communication device, getting its radio signal mixed up. After that, nothing else happened for months. My husband, boyfriend at the time, was staying with us for a while, and I had explained a little about charming and the things that I felt, but he never believed in any of that stuff anyways. Weeks after, I came home from work, and he was outside waiting in the driveway. He said he didn't feel comfortable going back in alone. My bedroom door never stayed open. It didn't close all the way, but it swung back and stayed half open. I'm sure it was because the house was so lopsided, so we kept an old boombox radio in front of it to hold it open. He told me he placed the boombox in front of the door, walked through the house and went outside for about 5 minutes, and when he came back the bedroom door was closed all the way, and the boombox was on the inside. Days later, I was in the shower, and I heard someone walk past the bathroom door 3 times, once from the bedroom, the kitchen, then back to the kitchen once more. When I got out of the shower, I went into the bedroom where my boyfriend was twisted up in all the blankets, sound asleep. I shook him awake and asked what he was looking for in the kitchen. He said he hadn't been in the kitchen. He was asleep in bed the whole time. Later that week, as he was leaving for the store, I watched the car pull out of the driveway and speed down the road. I headed into the basement and was putting laundry into the dryer when I heard footsteps upstairs walk from the front of the house to the back and then again to the front. When I went up there, no one was there. Shortly, my boyfriend returned, and I asked him if he had come back and then left again. He said he hadn't. Throughout the next couple of weeks, we would hear small noises at night. The magnets from the entertainment center cabinets clicking together and apart, but not opening. The TV turned on a couple of times. There would be footsteps in the attic, small things that didn't faze me. We tried to take pictures of eerie places around the house to see if maybe something would appear, but to no avail. It wasn't until my boyfriend moved across the state that things started happening again. It was my birthday, my plans got ruined, and I was sitting home alone, sad, with all the lights off. I started hearing this very loud banging sound. At first I thought it was fireworks, because it was July, but the sound was far too loud and close by to be fireworks. I figured out that it was coming from the attic. Nothing too strange ever happened in the attic before, just footsteps every so often, so I was slightly alarmed. It sounded like a hammer banging on wood. After a few minutes the banging stopped, and it sounded as if something large and heavy was being dragged across the floor of the attic to the opposite side of the house. Moments later, footsteps walked from that side of the attic back to the side where the banging had been. The process started again, banging, dragging, footsteps again and again. I went outside and called a friend over, but by the time she got there, it had stopped. A week or so after that, I was lying in bed alone and I felt like something was standing close to my bed. It has never been in my room when I have been in bed before. It was probably the creepiest moment out of all the things that happened during that 1.5 years. That was also the last. I moved out of the house 2 months later. I've been back a couple times. No one lives there still, and during the day you can look and see in all the windows through cracks in the shades. At night, if you look in from the side of the living room, you can see a light flickering like a flame from under the door of what used to be my kids' room. Finally, we moved to a new house. I don't have any footage from this house. I'm not sorry about that either. These experiences were more scary and less pranky than the townhouse. No moving objects, etc. While living in the townhouse, I became pregnant. We started looking for larger homes in an area closer to my husband's job. We found an affordable 4-bedroom in December of 2011 and moved in the days following that Christmas. The kids' rooms were on the main floor and conjoined by a tiny, like Fisher-Price Little People, tiny Jack and Jill bathroom. Inconvenient enough, it was the only bathroom in the house. There was a smaller room upstairs which we turned into the nursery. If you walk into the closet in that room, it led to a much larger bedroom for my husband and me. This room used to be an attic that had been poorly finished into bedrooms. It had that deer paneling. The ceilings slanted downward. The door, which led to the closet, nursery, was in the middle of the east wall. On either side of it were little doors to a couple of crawl spaces. Here is a drawing. It's a tad unproportioned to the real thing. When we moved in, I made my husband put my giant vanity dresser in front of the right one. It barely fit with the slanted ceiling. I stayed away from them. I didn't open them. I hated even having to walk by them, basically because I'm a huge fraidy cat, partly because the feeling of being watched had returned. I kept a lamp next to my bed so I could have a lot of light in the room while I was in bed reading and not have to get up to turn the lights off and then walk back to bed in the dark, alone. One night, I had just finished my book, First Grave on the Right by Dorinda Jones. I turned the lamp off, faced the wall, and pulled my oversized comforter up to my chin. I felt the mattress sink in on the other side of the bed, but I hadn't heard my husband come up the stairs. I couldn't hear any movement, just the feeling of someone sitting on the bed beside me. And then I smelled rotten eggs, sulfur. I know what that means. If you don't, then I'll tell you. The smell of sulfur is closely associated with the presence of demons. There are tales of sulfur-breathing demons, and other demons are thought to live in pits of sulfur and fire in hell. I curled up even farther into my blanket and shut my eyes as hard as I could. In a moment, it was gone. The smell had dissipated, and I was alone on the mattress again, and I slept. Guys, I'm not a crazy person, okay? I know that there are many reasons for the smell of sulfur. I absolutely made my husband check all of our pipes, the gas furnace, and look in the ducts that lead to the upstairs. There were no ducts in our room, only one in the nursery. He didn't find anything out of the ordinary and told me if I smell it again, then he'll call the landlord. But weeks later, my husband also had a pretty terrifying experience in that room. I'll tell his story the way he told it to me. He went up to the bedroom to take a nap one Saturday afternoon, crashed onto the bed, wadded up my oversized comforter into a ball in his arms, and drifted off to sleep. He had a dream that he was doing exactly that when he heard the crawl space door open. They were always latched shut from the outside, and something crept across the floor of the room. This whole time his eyes stayed shut in fear. The thing leapt onto the bed. It walked around him, sometimes rubbing up against him. He described it as small and sort of furry. He almost thought it was a cat, but was still too scared to open his eyes. It started licking his hands. It felt just like a cat's rough tongue on his fingers. In the dream, the cat thing bit his fingertip and it jolted him back into consciousness. He looked down at his hands, and his fingers were covered in this sticky black oil-like substance. He didn't tell me about this until weeks later after our newborn daughter was born. Once he did finally tell me, I was done. I never slept in that room again. I slept on the couch and the baby in the pack and play in the living room. Right around this time, my son, who was 3 at the time, had started sleepwalking. I'd find him in all sorts of places in the morning. The bathroom floor, in his closet, under his bed, in my room, his sister's room, under the kitchen table, shoved in between the wall and his dresser. My daughter's sleep yelling had gotten much better. One night, my husband was staying at his brother's because they were due to leave at the crack of dawn for some fishing trip. I put the kids to bed and was up with the baby until about 11 p.m. Once she fell asleep, I put her in the pack and play and lay down on the couch to get some sleep myself. I had just gotten comfortable when I heard this loud crash, bang coming from behind me. My first thought was that my son tried climbing his dresser and it fell over onto him, so I rushed to his room to find nothing out of place and him sleeping soundly in his bed, for once. So I tore across the living room to my daughter's room, again to find nothing out of place, and her sleeping soundly. I checked on the baby, same. I went into the bathroom to find out what fell, but nothing was out of place. Nothing on the floor, nothing in the tub, nothing. I shrugged and lay back on the couch. As I'm trying to drift back off to sleep, I hear some whispering. It's definitely coming from the floor vent. I knelt down to listen. I could not make out any actual words, but there were definitely adult, humanish voices. I went to listen at the other floor vent and heard the same. Someone was in my basement. There is a door to the basement in the kitchen. You open the door, go down about 4 steps, and there is a landing. From the landing, you can exit the house into the backyard, or you can go left and walk down the stairs into the cold, clammy, unfinished, spider-infested basement. The door from the kitchen was closed and locked. I thought someone had busted in our back door and was now in our basement. I grabbed the baby, woke my daughter, and we all huddled on the bed in my son's room. I called my husband. Actually, I blew up his phone until he finally picked up. Out of a dead sleep, he hopped on a bicycle and flew home. Looking back now, I think, why didn't I call the police? I stayed in the room with the kids when my husband got home. He checked the entire house. The back door was still shut and locked. There was no one or nothing in the basement. Nothing had fallen over upstairs. To this day, I do not know what caused that crashing sound I heard. We had a friend, down on his luck, move in with us for about a year. We gave him the upstairs and we slept on a blow-up bed in the living room. The friend never reported any strange occurrences, and I didn't experience anything else while he was there. He moved out in January 2012, and things started again. The first was when I went into the basement. There was an old bar down there where my husband kept his junk collection, tools, and other random stuff that he hoards. I went looking for screwdriver. It was just me and the baby in the house. She was asleep. Even though it was daylight, there was little light that shone in through the tiny windows. There were 3 ceiling lights that you had to pull a string to turn on. I always leave the light above the washer and dryer on because I'm big sissy and don't want to have to walk through the dark to get to the light switch. But my husband used to bitch about electricity wasting and the bill being rung up, so he'd turn the light off if he ever saw that I left it on. So when I go into the basement, the light was off, not unusual. I turned my phone flashlight on and proceeded into the darkness to turn on the light bulb. I pulled the string and nothing happened. Pulled it a couple more times out of insanity, but it was burnt out, probably from leaving it on so much. I go to the next light bulb. Same thing, doesn't turn on. Either does the third. I honestly can't remember why it was so important that I had that screwdriver, but I just started digging around for it in the dark with just my phone's flashlight. I stuck my hand into this cardboard box full of other random tools and whatnots and felt something disgusting. I yanked my hand back and looked at it with the light to see that my fingertips were covered in this sticky black oil substance. I thought of the cat thing that licked my husband's hands as he slept, and I booked it up the stairs as fast as my fat ass could go. I get up the stairs, into the living room where my baby is sleeping in the pack and play, and I see her laying on a playmat in the middle of the floor, still asleep. I know I did not leave her like that. She fell asleep in my arms, so I know I put her in the pack and play. No way would I ever just leave her on the floor alone. I started to feel like I was going crazy. My husband's skepticism wasn't helping that. I was terrified that something had touched and held my tiny little baby. I wanted the fuck out of that house.